بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. We were talking about israf, which is not spending moderately, but usually going extravagant. And we were talking about some verses that were saying that, you know, to give in some narrations that to give your wealth even in excess is not israf. But when we had some verses that said not to, give out all your wealth because you'll be left destitute and things like this. So we have different narrations and different ayat. So we need to find a way to reconcile these two because they seem to conflict each other. And we'll see what the author has to say. He says, in order to reconcile the differing verses, the scholars have mentioned some clauses. In the Sharh of Al-Kafi, we find that, according to Tabarsi, it's possible that the arguments in favor of selflessness pertain to the times of poverty. For example, the initial period of Islam and the recommendation emphasizing on moderation and charity pertain to prosperous times. Or they may differ according to the economic condition of the one who seeks help. Some people deserve to be helped even by sacrificing one's own needs, and there are some people who need not be helped at the cost of one's own needs. It also depends upon the person who is being charitable. If he possesses complete and perfect faith, there is no harm if he exceeds the limits of generosity to fulfill the needs of people. But if an ordinary person donates everything to someone who is poor, he will not be able to bear it. He can't have patience with that. He says in this case, it's advisable for him to stay within the limits of charity. Thus, except for the divine personalities and extremely pious people like Awliya Allah, and the masses cannot be said to be of that category. Uh, he said, therefore, the ayat that we mentioned, Surah Isra, ayat 29, and do not make your hand, this verse we mentioned before about the shackle to your neck, and there's also in Surah Yasin. He said it's addressed to the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it's meant to be for the general Muslims. So it's addressed to the Prophet to address the general population. Muhammad ibn Mekki was of the opinion that the rules of charity differ from person to person. The traditions which imply extreme selflessness are only for those who give their personal belongings to the needy, and the traditions that hint at moderation, even in charity, are meant for those who have a wife, children, family, they have dependents. Such a person cannot prefer other people to his own children. He cannot give away whatever is necessary for his family to other needy people. Taking care of your dependents is wajib, whereas giving sadaqah is mustahab. You cannot leave a wajib for a mustahab. Like you cannot make your mustahabat, your salat or namaz, and then don't make the wajib ones. He says sacrifice of our own needs is allowed, but it is not permitted to give away the requirements of our family and our children. The honorable scholar has also stated that it's makruh for a man to donate his total wealth in charity, unless he is absolutely sure that he'll be able to bear the consequences of that. Also, it's necessary that he doesn't have the responsibility of a family or children. So, it depends. These verses are addressing different groups of people. One may not have family and children, therefore he can give away all his belongings if he can bear the responsibility. Whereas the other one who has people depending on him, it's not right for him to give away his dependents' rights. It says Sayyid Muhammad Kadhim al-Yazdi also remarks that according to the Holy Quran, Sunnah of Rasulullah, and Ijma of ulama, Israf is haram, and there's no objection to this verdict. Israf is the expenditure on useless things, which is considered as wasteful by common sense, whether an amount is spent is appropriate to the occasion or not. So it's being wasteful, spending out of place. The author brings a question. He says, is israf possible in charitable deeds? Some scholars, like Sayyid Muhammad Qadhim al-Yazdi, believe that it is possible, and some well-known jurists have also stated to the opposite. According to the traditions, there's no goodness in israf, and there's no israf in goodness. But we should know that this opinion to be more precautionary, to go with the first one, on the basis, of other traditions that we have on this subject. So it's better to be moderate in this, and it's closer to precaution. We have hadith from Ibn Abi Umair and others that the late Sayyid, he says, the ayat and narrations denouncing wasteful expenditure revoke or abrogate the ayat of selfless sacrifice. Therefore, it appears that it is not proper to sacrifice and to give gifts extravagantly which are not appropriate to the status of the donor, or which common sense perceives such generosity to be excessive. For example, someone needs a ride home from the masjid because his car is at home and he rode there with someone else. So he came to Husseiniya, for example, for Majlis or for Juma, and he left his car at home. He rode with someone else. That person can't take him home. So instead of giving him a ride, you just say, here's my car, just take it and keep it. This is out of place. It's not in the proper way, and it's extravagant because the person already has a car. All he needs is a ride home. So this would be extravagant. He said there's no logic in giving and taking of such gifts and donations. As mentioned earlier, wasteful spending in necessary matters is also prohibited. The only exception to this is in Hajj and Umrah, which don't have any limits to them, because we have hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that says no spending is more likable to Allah than one who is moderate. And except for overspending in Hajj, he dislikes all type of israf. So Rasulullah says Allah dislikes all type of israf, but then made an exception to this rule when it comes to overspending in Hajj or donating to someone who is going to Hajj. The author of this book, he's has a strong opinion that there is no such extravagance in charity. As I said, there's a differing opinion between ulama. He believes there is no israf in giving charity. Even if a person gives his total wealth with the intention, qurbatan ilallah, pleasing Allah, and getting reward for that, he doesn't do anything unacceptable, he says. And he justifies his opinion based on a few of the many ayah that we mentioned. And he says about the ayat, and do not move your hand, is a lenient prohibition. And it doesn't mention the act as being haram, or it doesn't mention the act as makruh. Also, he brings ayat from Surah Furqan, ayat 67. And they who, when they spend, they are neither extravagant nor are they wasteful, and they keep between these the just way. He say this may pertain to household expenditure and not to that which is spent in the way of Allah. Maybe this is meaning something else, he says. And it may also mean that those who are not stingy and also not extravagant are the obedient creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He brings other ayat, Surah An'am, ayat 141, eat of its fruit, and when it bears fruit, and do not act extravagantly. Surely he does not love the extravagant, those who do israf. So from these sentences, they can form a single statement. It says the tradition which explains the ayat also shows that these two are interrelated with each other. Though it is true that a person who donates the entire crop of his in charity and doesn't keep anything for his family and children, he certainly commits israf. Charity and giving in the cause of Allah is allowed, but feeding and clothing the dependents is wajib on him. So he has responsibilities that are wajib on him, whereas giving away is mustahab. It's recommended. You cannot overlook the wajib and push the wajib aside to do recommended. One who deprives his dependents of their basic needs and gives everything in charity has acted against Allah's command. But if we see that if he feels sure, he has surety that he'll be able to fulfill the needs of his family from somewhere else, then that way his dependents can't claim their rights from him and say, you didn't feed me, you didn't clothe me, you didn't pay for my place to live and all of these things. So maybe he gave away all of his wealth, but he knows that he'll secure some money before his dependents need it. And then it is okay for him to do that. It's prohibited, I mean, it's permissible for him to give everything away in fi sabilillah in that case. And this can also be supported from examples from the lives of Imma alayhi salam. We have example in Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, that he had done many times. He performed such sacrifice and gave away all of his belongings. One time he sold his orchard for 12,000 dirham, and then he gave away all of it to the poor and the needy people. He didn't keep anything for his family, but Imam Ali alayhi salam never deprived his own dependents. Whenever they did such sadaqah, they had faith that they would be able to provide for their families from some other way. He says whatever has been stated with regard to the ayat prohibiting overspending can also be supported with the tradition from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, wherein he denounced the person who spends all his wealth and he dies and he leaves some small children behind and they are poor and they are helpless. It's forbidden for a person to spend his complete wealth in charity when he knows that after him, his children will need it. So some people, for example, they have children and they know that they will leave them behind. And if they give away all of their stuff, they won't have anything. It's forbidden for them to do that. And if he leaves a legacy for his children who have no other source of income, so he leaves the money for his kids. This, what he leaves behind is also counted fi sabilillah, in the way of Allah. So he's leaving it for his kids. It is also counting as a type of charity, and he will get benefit from that. And his dependents are deserving of this because they're depending on him and he has to provide for them. Whereas the other people, he doesn't have to provide for them, but he just does so out of the kindness of his heart. He says it's for this reason that drawing a will with more for more than a third of one's total property is forbidden. It's also commanded for those who have young children to will for less than a third of their wealth, so they can leave more behind for their dependents. So these traditions about selflessness apply to just certain circumstances. Extreme generosity or giving away all of one's wealth is not forbidden, and but we have to take some precaution with that. He says the narration may imply that it's not proper to overspend where Imam has prohibited extravagance. And then the tradition of the faqih or the jurist may concern those people who spend in recommended ways, whereas it is incumbent for them not to spend. The tradition of the Imam may also be a refutation of the Sufis, because they say that extreme selflessness is wajib, and they do without and they live on the bare minimum, and they give away everything they have and don't hold on to any worldly possessions at all. Whereas we can use our worldly possessions for the hereafter, and it's not the case that we have to live with nothing and sleep on a straw mat or something like this. We are allowed to have nice things in this life, and it's not the case. So he say it may be refutation to them, that narration. And the Imams have also pointed out that spending for one's own family needs is also like spending in the way of Allah. So taking care of one's dependents is the same as taking, spending in cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's very important. We have narrations, for example, to spend 1 hour with your family is like doing itikaf in Holy Kaaba. So sometimes we say, I need to spend my time on other things. but we think as spending the time with our family is not really rewardable that much compared to spending it on other things. But we have narrations that say 1 hour with your family is like ittikaf in Holy Kaaba. So it is like spending your time fi sabilillah in the way of Allah by just sitting with your family and having family time. He said the words of tradition also imply that moderation in ways of charity is emphasized with a gentle command. So it's not a prohibitive command. In other words, overspending in charity is only a recommended prohibition, whereas we are aware of the incomparable charitable acts of Rasulullah and A'imma alayhimus salam and the verses that were revealed in the praise of those deeds. So the command, to not overdo in charity is a light type of command. It's not an absolute command that forbids it totally, is what he's saying, but is precautionary, to make sure the person can bear that trial with patience and not complain against Allah or not go and do haram to get more money and these other things. He says, we see that Imam Hassan alayhi salam, and he gave in his life several times half of his money in charity to the needy on 3 occasions, the author mentions. Also, the charitable deeds of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and the other Imams, and Imam Rida alayhi salam gave away all of his wealth in charity on the day of Arafat. So we have these examples, but these are extraordinary people. They are the best of mankind, and they know that they can provide from their family for other means, and they know that their rizq is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they would never complain against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, when one of the companions pointed out that the Imam Rida alayhi salam, when he did that, he suffered a great loss. Imam says, whatever I have received as my share is sufficient. So Imam is like, whatever I have is good enough. I don't need all of these things. I give it to the poor. They need it more than me. Also on the day of Nowruz, uh, when he took the seat of the heir apparent of Ma'mun, he gave away all the presents and the gifts to a single poet who recited the praise of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. So everything that he was given, he gave it away. Also, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam said, if all the world becomes my property, I own everything in dunya, and it becomes a single morsel of food, and I put that morsel in the mouth of one believer, I will not consider myself as being extravagant. Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam says something similar. If all the world becomes a morsel and I give it to a true worshipper of Allah, I will feel I have not fulfilled his rights completely. And if I give even a sip of water to a starving disbeliever, I consider myself as extravagant. So we see that giving all his wealth, all the dunya, everything that's in this world to a believer, he still feels like I haven't done enough for him. Whereas giving something small to the enemy of Allah, he considered as is extravagant because it is wasteful. It didn't go to its proper place. He said these two narrations expound the fact that even if the whole world is gifted to a sincere and pious believer, it will not be extravagant. It won't be israf because he deserves it. There are a lot of instances of selflessness of ulama, and that have been recorded in the books as well. And some of those people have seen the rewards of their charity in this life as well. Allah will reward us in this life and in the hereafter. There's a incident with Muhakkak Ardabili that during the times of famine, he used to give away to the poor whatever he had. And he used to just suffer in poverty himself, and he just wanted to give his stuff away. So one day when he donated all his things, his wife became angry with him. And then, that he had deprived his children and the food was scarce. They didn't have much stuff. So he left home and he went to the masjid and he sat there in ihtikaf. And some unknown person, while he was in the masjid, came and arrived at his door and knocked on his door and handed over to his wife several sacks of wheat and flour, and saying that his master Muqaddas Ardabili sent it, and that he was in i'tikaf in Masjid al-Kufa. Muhakkak Ardabili, he went home from i'tikaf and told his wife that, and his wife told him about this, that, wow, you sent all this nice, very, nice flour and wheat. And when he learned of the details around all this situation, that it was some, tawfiq or divine privilege that came upon him for giving away all of his things in charity. So he fell down and did sajda to shukr and thanked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he knew that Allah would take care of him, and Allah did send someone to give this to his family. And many times it was said about this alim that he would leave home with a very expensive type of cloth for his amama. But whenever he ran across the beggar, he would take a piece and cut it and give it to that beggar so that he could sell that cloth, and he could get some food or other things. And on a lot of occasions, he would leave with his amama, and then he would come back without anything on his head. He would gave away all of the cloth for the sake of the poor people. And amama looks like a not that long cloth when you see it like this, but when it's unraveled, I don't know if you've ever seen anyone wrap amama, but amama is usually 10 meters long, so it's quite long, but when it's wrapped and compressed, it doesn't look like it would be that long. He says, until now we've discussed israf in regards to money, but since the dictionary meaning of israf is exceeding the limits and extremism, the same law applies to beliefs and actions. Israf implies believing about oneself or other people things that are not true or things that are inappropriate. For example, Fir'aun believed that he was Allah, and he told people, I don't know any other gods except myself. And Allah mentioned him that he had exceeded the limits. He had done israf. In Surah Yunus, ayah 83, it says, surely Fir'aun was lofty in the land, and most surely he was of the extravagant. Also, regarding those who don't believe in Allah, they don't believe in Prophet, they don't believe in Imams, Yawm al-Qiyamah, all of these things. Allah says in the Quran, in Surah Taha, ayat 127, and thus do we recompense him who is extravagant and does not believe in the communications of his Lord. And certainly the chastisement of the hereafter is severer and more lasting. Also, performing reprehensible, detestable acts and avoiding the recommended things is also israf. For example, the inclinations of the people of Lut, they have been termed as israf. In Surah A'raf, ayah 81, Allah says, and most surely you come to the males in lust beside the females. Nay, you are an extravagant people. You have committed israf. You have done something out of place. It's extravagant. It's wasteful. It's not in the proper way. Because we say that, for example, with spending, we are not spending something in the proper way. It is out of place. We are doing it in the wrong, in the wrong way. So Israf mentioned the people of Lut because Allah created the man and the woman to be married, to reproduce, and these things, and they are neglecting this and going to find something else to do, which is haram for them. So this is Israf. Author says, in fact, all the sins and of actions that we do and speech that we say are a kind of extremism, all of the sins. And every sinner is said to have crossed the limits or done israf. Because, Allah has given us things. He has given us eyes to see. But when we use them in the wrong way, we misuse the bounty that Allah has given us, and we have misused it. And this is a type of israf, it's type of wasteful usage. We used our eyes to look at haram, but that's not what our eyes were intended for. We use our hands to oppress people, but this is not what Allah gave us hands for. Allah has given us feet and legs to walk towards good things, but if we use them in the wrong way and walk towards bad things, it is type of israf. We have wasted the opportunity that we had time. For example, if we waste our time, it's type of israf. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, say, O my servants who have acted extravagantly against their own souls, do not despair of the mercy of Allah. Surely Allah forgives the faults altogether. Surely He is the forgiving and the most merciful. This is Surah 39, ayat 53. So when we commit sins, we are doing israf against our own self. We are oppressing our own self. Why we say in Dua Kamel, ظَلَمْتُ nafsi. We have wronged our own self. We have done dhulm or oppression against our own self. He says, but we must not despair of our deficiencies, because we have deficiencies, but we have to work on them in this life. And by this, we look at the Ahlul Bayt alayhim wasalam and how they acted and how they handled things and how they lived their life. And we try to emulate them and model them in the best way that we can. And we have to continue to work on that daily. It is a type of jihad al-nafs that we have to work on. They say jihad al-akbar, the greater jihad. It's, even greater than fighting in the battlefield. It's more difficult to fight against your own self and our own desires. So we have to work on ourselves so that we don't waste the things that Allah has given us, and we use them for the proper intended meanings. And in order to do this, we need to take the time and study about the lives of Rasulullah firstly and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam to see how they lived. So when we encounter a situation, we see, okay, we think to ourselves, okay, what would Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi would have done? What would Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, what would they have done? And when you are familiar with their life, sometimes you recognize the same type of situation that they were in. You say, I am now in the same situation, something very similar. How did the Imam handle that? And then you handle it in the way that the Imam did, or you can go and do your own way and then maybe have done something wrong. He says, if we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will certainly forgive us for the wrong things that we have done. And we, on our part, should make a sincere effort not to be wasteful in our daily lives and not to exceed the limits in whatever we are doing. Moderation has to be practiced by us even in routine acts that we do daily, like eating, drinking, sleeping, talking. All of these need to be done in moderation, because we see that eating too less is bad for us. Eating too much is bad for us. It needs to be moderate. Sleeping too much is bad for us. Not sleeping enough is bad for us. Talking too little is not good, and talking too much is not good. Everything needs to be balanced. We need to take the middle course and be moderate, because Muslims are moderate people, not extreme in one way or the other. We have narration that says, verily Allah hates the one who eats excessively and the one who sleeps excessively. So we see that even in these type of actions, they can be done israf. We can do israf in sleeping, we can do israf in eating. The author said there are, many more things about this subject, but you can read other books about this, and this is sufficient for, this discussion. And we end this chapter. And actually, this is the end of volume 2 from this book. So we have one more volume. It's in 3 volumes. I have the physical book all in 1 volume, but when they made these PDFs and I think later edition print, they made 3 volumes. So alhamdulillah, we are 2/3 of the way done with this book, and inshallah we'll continue with it next week. Sallu ala
إن شاء
Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
الله. اللهم صل على محمد. جزاك الله.
Allahumma